The Gospel of Mark, chapter 7. What would you call someone who is a church member, attends services on Sundays, bows their head, closes their eyes, and puts their hands together during grace before meals, doesn't smoke, drink, or do drugs, hangs out mostly with people who are Bible believers, and puts family above all? You might call them a devoted, upstanding Christian, despite the fact that Jesus never commanded us to do any of these things. In our passage today, Mark chapter 7, Jesus breaks stereotypes. We see that the righteous life he calls us to goes way beyond our religious rituals and external appearances. Real Christianity is fundamentally a condition of the heart. It is an inward renewal that then reveals itself in our outward actions, not the other way around. And that renewal is available to all people, regardless of ethnicity, gender, social standing, or background. Here are the subtitles for the three sections that make up Mark 7, according to the New Revised Standard Version. The tradition of the elders, the Syrophoenician woman's faith, and Jesus cures a deaf man. This section, the tradition of the elders, is better understood if we first define words and explain the traditions mentioned here. The teachers of the law or scribes and the Pharisees arose as the religious leaders of Israel during the century or two prior to Christ's birth. To a large extent, they followed a detailed and extensive set of oral rules. Centuries later, they were laid down in written form in the Jewish text called the Mishnah. In our passage today, these regulations are called the tradition of the elders. Thus, these rules existed before the time of Christ, but were not written down until after. Here are some concepts that may be unfamiliar to us: ritual purity, defilement, hand washing, and korban. Let's take a look at each of these. Many of these traditions involved maintaining ritual purity. One had to avoid anything that was deemed unclean. The Pharisees discerned a great number of unclean things that one might encounter in the ordinary course of life, and that might easily be touched with the hands. The contact made the hands unclean, and if unclean hands touched food, that too became unclean. When it was eaten, the whole person was made unclean. So mere contact with unclean people and objects could defile a person. Defile means to make a person some combination of dirty, tainted, impure, contaminated, untouchable. It does not denote a physical condition so much as a sociological and religious one. A person can remain pure and undefiled if they regularly go through certain ceremonies, such as washing their hands before eating. This was not actually a hygiene issue. It seems that a small amount of water was used, too little to clean the hands fully or effectively remove dirt or bacteria. The important thing was the ritual. Jesus knows that being a pure person inside is not a matter of what you eat or how you eat it. Going through a religious formality does not make one clean, either physically or morally. Note that at the feeding of the 5,000, everyone likely ate with unwashed hands. Another concept unfamiliar to us is korban. It seems that there was a provision in the regulations that allowed a person to designate their money and possessions to be given to God, that is, to the temple, upon their death. This was called korban. It effectively made the resources unavailable for other uses, such as supporting those in need. However, the person who had made the pledge can continue to use the dedicated goods for themselves during their lifetime. This enabled the rich to live a comfortable lifestyle while ignoring the hardships of their relatives on the rationale that they are following established customs. Jesus points out the hypocrisy of following a rule that is not specifically commanded by God in order to justify not following a rule that is specifically commanded, namely, honor your father and mother. One Bible scholar called this practice pious fraud. The leaders were encouraging the Jews to follow a practice that looked righteous and sounded noble, but prevented compassionate care for their parents. So, with these concepts in mind, let's take a look at our story today. Jesus has gotten to the point in his ministry where his fame precedes him, and he is causing quite a stir wherever he goes. The Pharisees and scribes have come all the way from Jerusalem to encounter him. It is quite remarkable that the most authoritative religious leaders would come from the holy capital city to a remote area in the country to question Jesus. This is not get acquainted time, it is confrontation. Right off the bat, the leaders say, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders, instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" Seems like they've caught Jesus and his followers clearly breaking the rules. But what the leaders don't say and don't distinguish is that this is not a commandment from God. As we pointed out earlier, it is an unwritten tradition that is observed simply because religious leaders have always said it should be. In fact, the tradition of the elders is full of rules just like it. Motivated but misguided leaders can place tradition above the law, compassion, even common sense. Jesus doesn't actually answer their question immediately. What he does do immediately is expose their underlying fallacy. He quotes the prophet Isaiah, whose words, though more than 700 years old, have contemporary significance. "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." People can say the right things without really meaning them. They can displace the true religion of the heart with a religion of form. Though a person can participate in religious activities such as hand washing and korban, they can have no real relationship with God. People were like that in Isaiah's time, and they are like that today. We must be starkly honest with ourselves because we can mask a hard heart. One primary way a hard heart can be masked is behind external acts of religion. There are many people in churches today with hard hearts. They regularly attend church and appear to be religious, but their hearts are hardened to God and to his people. A hard heart can also be masked behind glitzy performances, whether the performance is preaching or singing or praying. Religious heart diseases are often not seen by the one who has the disease. We've already seen how people who should know better have it all backwards. The religious leaders want to criticize how Christ followers eat. Dining with sinners. Not fasting regularly. Eating grain picked on the Sabbath. Eating without proper hand washing. What they don't realize, Jesus says, is that what goes in the mouth does not defile a person. It is what comes out of the mouth, because that is what reveals the person within. Jesus has now answered his opponent's question. And I believe Mark intends us to remember what came out of the Pharisees' mouths. It was the persistent claim that Jesus is empowered by Satan. That is the unpardonable sin. It is the outward verbal expression of a problem of the heart, the incapacity to acknowledge the work of the Holy Spirit. We might think about the implications of what Jesus is saying about how we express ourselves. Our words reflect who we are. Our pretenses and our honesty, our praising and our criticisms, our tone of voice, jokes, offhand comments, they all affect others, to be sure, but they also say much about our character. You could probably legitimately expand the list to nonverbal actions as well, such as our facial expressions and body language, our writings, texts, emails, even our silences. Well, Mark doesn't tell us how the religious leaders responded to Christ's contentions, but it wouldn't be surprising if they were offended. In fact, they were probably seething with anger. So it is just as well that Jesus goes away to the Gentile region of Tyre and Sidon on the Mediterranean coast. The region is called Syrian Phoenicia, and it refers to a narrow strip of land called Phoenicia, located north of Galilee between Syria and the Mediterranean Sea. Today, this is the country of Lebanon. The woman in our story is sometimes called a Canaanite. Palestine at one time was largely the land of Canaan before the Jews arrived. Canaanite would thus be a designation for one belonging to the scattered remnant of the Canaan civilization that once occupied the ancient Middle East. Jesus encounters this Syrophoenician woman near the city of Tyre. She has a demonized daughter at home. We don't know how this manifested in the girl, but if she is oppressed like the Gerasene man, she must be suffering. The woman pleads for help for her daughter. Jesus responds to her in a surprising way. He uses a parable or allegory. First let the children eat all they want, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. The implication here is that the initial recipients of God's blessing, symbolized by the bread, are to be the Jews, portrayed as the children, not the Gentiles, described as dogs, the common Jewish derogatory term for them. Thus, Jesus' words seem to imply he will not help her. How are we to understand this response? Jesus at least is recognizing that the good news was to come first to the nation of Israel. Some commentators have felt that Jesus was being tongue-in-cheek in making a typical Jewish statement to see how the woman would react. Others have pointed out that Jesus' words and tone of voice are more gentle than they seem. The Greek word translated dogs implies affectionate children's pets, not dirty street mongrels. Regardless of how we take the words of Christ here, the woman was certainly not deterred, and Jesus was fully willing to help her. She makes the extraordinary statement to the effect that even though the Gentiles, the dogs, are not the primary recipients of the food, God's blessings, they should at least receive residual blessings, the crumbs, from God's favor on the Jews. She understood the priority given to the Jews, but she was willing to accept even small morsels of divine grace. As a Gentile, it was not her place to jump to the head of the line, so to speak. This reveals a humble faith that Jesus cannot refuse. Jesus removes the demon from the woman's daughter. It probably went to the same place as the demons who left the pigs. How did the Syrophoenician woman gain such insight into the things of God that she could respond to Jesus in the way that she did? We may never know. We do know that people from Tyre had previously come to Galilee to listen to Christ's teaching, so Jesus was not completely unknown in that city. But I would like to pose another possibility. She acted on the faith she had, however rudimentary it might have been at the beginning. She could not have known for sure if Jesus would respond to her, a non-Jew, but she sought him out even though he was avoiding crowds at the time. From the parable of the soils, we see that receptivity to God is key to receiving from God. And from the parable of the measure, we know that the degree to which we seek God's insight is related to the degree to which we receive it. The paradigm then is that her understanding was the result of trusting God, seeking him out, and being open to his truth. Thus part of it is her choice, and part of it is God's grace. That is what healed her daughter. That is how her faith, small as a mustard seed, became great faith. When Jesus and the disciples leave Phoenicia, they avoid Galilee, where, as you will recall, some people wanted to make Jesus king, and Herod Antipas executed John the Baptist. Skirting the Sea of Galilee, they arrive in the Decapolis, a loose federation of Greek cities located mostly east and southeast of the lake. It includes the area of the Gadarenes, where Jesus encountered demons and resulted in the drowning of a herd of pigs. It is also the mission field for one of the first Gentile missionaries, the man who was freed of the demons. We notice a shift in emphasis occurring in Christ's ministry. His message is now coming to Gentiles, and they are responding. One such Gentile is a man who is deaf and mute. His particular story is found only in the Gospel of Mark and has a number of interesting aspects to it, which we will discuss when we look at the healing of the blind man in chapter 8. But for now, I'd like to focus on three things. Before he restored the man's hearing and speech, he 1. Put his fingers into the man's ears, 2. Spit, and 3. Touched the man's tongue. Now, what's with that? Jesus could not tell the person what he was about to do, so he acted it out. He let the man know that he will open his ears so that sound could be heard, and he would loosen his tongue so that the man would spit words out of his mouth, in a manner of speaking. Sometimes healing involves only a command or a touch. This time, it included a pantomime. When you read the story of the Gentile deaf man, you may wonder if he was an isolated case, but we know from Matthew that other mute people were restored by Christ. And when the Syrophoenician woman asked for crumbs, does that mean she received only limited blessing from God? No, she got the full meal deal. Her daughter was completely freed of the demon, and Matthew tells us that Jesus proclaimed the woman's faith as nothing short of great. And if we need any more assurance of Christ's love for all people, just see what comes next. The feeding of the 4,000, and they are Gentiles.